There was a reason you came into their life. It wasn't by accident, and it certainly wasn't just for their entertainment or convenience. You were placed there as a mirror, one that could reflect both the beauty and the brokenness within them. But here's the hard truth. Some people aren't ready to see themselves clearly. They aren't prepared to face the parts of themselves that need healing, repentance, or growth. So instead of embracing the truth you reflected, they rejected you. A mirror doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter or manipulate. It simply reveals what is. And when God uses someone as a mirror in another person's life, it's an act of grace. It's a warning wrapped in love. You weren't sent to shame them or tear them down. You were sent to show them who they really are and who they could become, if only they were willing to change. But the thing about truth is, it can be uncomfortable. It can expose wounds, pride, and deception that people would rather ignore. And when a narcissist looks into a mirror of truth, their first instinct isn't to change. It's to shatter the mirror. You may have experienced this firsthand. The moment you started holding them accountable, the moment you stopped tolerating the manipulation, the moment you called out the patterns of control, they turned on you. Maybe they called you too sensitive or too much. Maybe they twisted your words, made you feel crazy, or blamed you for the very things they were doing. This wasn't about you. This was about them not wanting to face what God was trying to show them. And when someone refuses to face themselves, they will do whatever it takes to silence the one holding the mirror. But here's what I need you to hear. Their rejection of you does not mean you were wrong. It does not mean you were unworthy, unlovable, or mistaken in what you saw. It simply means they weren't ready to change. And that was never your responsibility. Your role was never to fix them. Your role was never to make them see. Your role was to stand in truth, to reflect God's love, to be obedient to what He called you to do. And once you did that, the outcome was never in your hands. God always gives warnings before consequences. He always provides a chance for repentance before judgment. You were that chance. You were that warning. And when they ignored it, when they dismissed you as if you were the problem, they weren't rejecting just you. They were rejecting God's grace. They were choosing to stay blind rather than receive sight. And that choice comes with a cost. Sometimes we wrestle with the pain of being discarded, devalued, or misunderstood by the very people we were sent to help. It can feel unfair, even cruel. But I want to remind you, Jesus Himself was rejected. He came in love. He spoke truth. He offered healing, and yet many turned away. Their rejection of Him didn't make His message any less true, and their rejection of you doesn't make your presence any less valuable. You were faithful. You did what you were called to do, and now it's between them and God. If they refuse to look in the mirror, if they refuse to acknowledge the truth you reflected, that doesn't mean the mirror was broken. It just means they weren't ready to see. And when someone refuses to see, life will eventually show them what they were unwilling to face. It may not be through you, but it will happen. Because truth is persistent, God is persistent, and what is ignored today often becomes undeniable tomorrow. So release the weight of their rejection. It was never yours to carry. Trust that God used you exactly as He intended. And know this, a mirror never loses its value just because someone refuses to look. There is something deeply sacred about the way God warns His children. He does not thunder down condemnation without first offering a path to redemption. His warnings are never meant to shame, never meant to destroy. They are always invitations wrapped in love, meant to wake us up before it's too late. And sometimes He uses people to deliver those warnings. Sometimes He sends someone into another person's life as a living, breathing message. This is your chance. This is your wake-up call. This is my grace giving you one more opportunity to change. If you were placed in the life of a narcissist, if you found yourself in a relationship, friendship, or family dynamic where you saw the dysfunction, the patterns of manipulation, the self-deception, and the harm they were causing, then you were not there by accident. You were there as part of a divine plan. A warning wrapped in love, not a threat, not an attack, not a punishment. A warning is simply truth spoken before consequences arrive. And what greater act of love is there than to try and prevent someone from destroying themselves and those around them? But the painful reality is that not everyone wants to be warned. Not everyone sees love as love when it comes in the form of accountability. To the narcissist, love is only love when it makes them feel good, when it feeds their ego, when it bows to their needs. The moment love challenges them, the moment love says, this isn't healthy, the moment love sends its ground, they call it cruelty. They call it betrayal. They call it an attack. But in reality, it is grace. It is mercy knocking at the door saying, turn around before it's too late. You probably didn't even realize that's what you were. You weren't trying to be their final warning. You were just being yourself. You were offering kindness, honesty, and genuine care. But God placed you there as a test, as an opportunity for them to see themselves clearly and make a different choice. Did they listen, or did they double down on their pride? Did they soften, or did they become more hardened, more entitled, more deceptive? Here's the hard truth. Rejecting a warning does not erase its reality. Ignoring the stop sign does not prevent the crash. When God sends a warning and it is dismissed, the only thing left is the consequence. And you were never responsible for making them listen. You were never meant to force them to change. That was between them and God. You were simply the voice before the storm, the lighthouse before the shipwreck, the whisper of grace before the fall. It is heartbreaking to watch someone reject love that was meant to save them. It is devastating to see someone twist your good intentions, label you as the enemy, and push you away when all you wanted was for them to heal, to grow, to see the truth. But don't mistake their rejection of you for a failure on your part. The warning was given, the message was delivered, and what they do with it is out of your hands. There comes a moment when God allows people to experience the weight of their own choices. He does not force change upon those who refuse it. And when the warnings have been ignored, when love has been discarded, when truth has been ridiculed, he steps back and lets them walk their own path. Not out of cruelty, but out of justice, out of respect for the free will they have exercised, out of love that does not coerce, but simply lets the truth stand. So if you have been that warning, if you have been that voice of love, and yet you were rejected, know this: you were not wasted. Your love was not in vain. You were an instrument of grace, even if they did not recognize it. And though they may have ignored it, God did not. He saw your obedience. He saw your heart, and now he will handle the rest. Pride has a voice. It is loud, defensive, and quick to reject anything that threatens its power. It whispers, I already know best. I don't need to change. The problem is everyone else. And when pride speaks, wisdom is drowned out. The person who listens to pride stops growing. They stop receiving. They stop seeing the truth. Because to admit the truth would mean admitting they are wrong. And for a narcissist, that is an unbearable thought. You were sent into their life as an opportunity, a moment of grace, where wisdom could have stepped in. Maybe you challenged their behavior in a way they weren't used to. Maybe for the first time, someone saw through the carefully curated mask and spoke to the deeper issues they refused to confront. You weren't trying to hurt them. You were trying to help. But when pride is in control, even love feels like an attack. And instead of listening, instead of humbling themselves, they defended, deflected, and dismissed. That's the tragedy of pride. It shuts the door on transformation. It keeps people stuck in cycles of dysfunction because they would rather protect their ego than receive wisdom. The Bible says in Proverbs 16:18, Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Not sometimes, not occasionally. Pride always leads to a fall. Because when someone refuses to listen, refuses to learn, and refuses to take accountability, the only thing left is consequence. You may have seen it firsthand. The way they twisted your words to make themselves the victim. The way they blamed you for the very things they were guilty of. The way they mocked your insight instead of considering that maybe, just maybe, you were right. But that wasn't a reflection of you. That was a reflection of their unwillingness to receive what could have saved them. It was their pride speaking louder than wisdom. And here's what's hard to accept. You could have spoken with the gentleness of an angel, with the wisdom of a prophet, with the patience of a saint, and still they would not have listened. Because pride is not a hearing problem, it's a heart problem. A heart that has been hardened by arrogance will reject truth no matter how beautifully it is presented. And when someone refuses to receive wisdom, life has a way of making them learn the hard way. The thing about wisdom is it will not force itself on anyone. God offers it freely, but he does not demand that we take it. He sends people, he sends messages, he sends moments of conviction, but he does not override our will. If someone chooses to listen to pride instead, he will not argue with them. He will let them walk the path they have chosen, even if it leads to destruction. Not because he doesn't love them, but because love does not force transformation. Love offers the opportunity for change, but change must be chosen. You were that opportunity. You were a voice of wisdom in their life. And though they refused to listen, that doesn't mean your words were meaningless. Sometimes people have to fall before they realize they should have listened. Sometimes the very words they rejected will come back to them in their lowest moment. And when that happens, it won't be because you forced them to see, it will be because life showed them what they refused to acknowledge. So don't carry their rejection as a wound to your soul. Don't let their dismissal of wisdom make you doubt your own discernment. You saw clearly, you spoke truth, you offered love, and they ignored it. Not because you were wrong, but because pride spoke louder than wisdom. But one day, whether they admit it or not, they will remember that you were right. And by then, the only voice left will be the voice of consequence. We love to talk about God's mercy, and we should, because his mercy is beautiful, vast, and beyond human comprehension. It reaches into the darkest places, lifts up the most broken people, and offers forgiveness even when it's undeserved. But what we don't talk about enough is that God's mercy has limits. Not because he is unkind, but because mercy rejected eventually turns into judgment. God is patient. He gives warnings. He provides opportunities for change. He places people like you in someone's life to speak truth and offer grace. But when mercy is continuously ignored, when warnings are mocked, when truth is rejected over and over again, a line is crossed. A person can reject God so many times that eventually he lets them have their way, not because he wants to see them fall, but because he will not force someone to change when they have made it clear they don't want to. Think about Pharaoh in the Bible. God sent Moses to warn him repeatedly, "Let my people go, change your ways, humble yourself." But Pharaoh's heart was hard. He ignored the warnings. He refused to listen. And at a certain point, God stopped sending mercy and allowed the consequences to come. The same thing happens today. People think they can manipulate, control, and reject truth forever, but mercy has an expiration date. Not because God stops loving them, but because they have made their choice. When you were in the narcissist's life, you were part of God's mercy toward them. Your kindness, your patience, your willingness to see the good in them, it was all a reflection of God's heart, his grace, his desire for them to change before it was too late. But they took it for granted. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They assumed they could keep lying, keep manipulating, keep playing games with no consequences. They believed that because they got away with it before, they would always get away with it. But no one outsmarts God. No one can deceive him. He is merciful, yes, but he is also just. And when someone abuses his mercy, when they refuse every opportunity to change, when they repeatedly mock truth and reject conviction, judgment follows. Not because God is cruel, but because he will not allow arrogance and rebellion to go unchecked forever. It may feel unfair that they got away with so much. It may feel frustrating that you poured love into someone who never valued it. But don't be deceived. No one gets away with anything. Just because judgment doesn't come immediately doesn't mean it isn't coming. God's timing is perfect. And when he moves, there will be no escaping the consequences of a hardened heart. So let go of the need to make them see. Let go of the hope that if you had just said the right words, they would have changed. You did your part. You extended mercy. You were obedient to God's call. But now it is out of your hands. Mercy has been offered and it has been refused. And at this point, God is stepping back. Not because he doesn't care, but because sometimes people have to face consequences before they realize what they lost. Trust that he sees what you endured. Trust that he knows how much you tried. And trust that his justice will always prevail. Because while God is merciful, he is also righteous. And when mercy is ignored, justice will take its place. It's easy to believe that our worth is tied to how people treat us. When someone rejects us, mistreats us, or refuses to see our value, we start to wonder if maybe we were the problem. Maybe we weren't enough. Maybe if we had been a little kinder, a little stronger, a little more patient, they would have seen our heart and treated us differently. But here's the truth you need to hear today. Your purpose was never about their response. It was always bigger than them. God placed you in their life for a reason, but that reason was never about winning their approval. It was never about making them love you, respect you, or change because of you. Your role was to be obedient to what God called you to do, to love, to speak truth, to reflect his grace. Their response was never in your control, and whether they embraced you or rejected you, your purpose remains the same. Some people were never meant to see your worth, not because you don't have it, but because their vision is too clouded by pride, pain, and self-deception to recognize a gift when it's right in front of them. They were so consumed with control, ego, and manipulation that they couldn't receive what you had to offer. That's not a reflection of you, it's a reflection of their inability to accept something real, something pure, something that challenged them to grow. Jesus himself was rejected. He loved with a perfect love, and yet many people turned away from him. Not because he wasn't enough, but because they weren't ready to receive what he was offering. If the Son of God could be misunderstood, mistreated, and cast aside, why do we expect that everyone in our lives will see us for who we truly are? Rejection does not mean you failed. It means they were not prepared to handle what God placed inside of you. You were never meant to stay small to make them comfortable. You were never meant to beg for love, for understanding, for basic decency. If someone could not appreciate the heart you brought into their life, that does not mean you need to change. It means you need to accept that they were not meant to be part of your future. Your purpose does not shrink just because someone else refuses to acknowledge it. What God put inside of you is still there, still powerful, still necessary, regardless of who failed to see it. So stop replaying the moments where they dismissed you. Stop questioning whether you could have done more, whether you should have fought harder for them to understand you. Their rejection was not your failure. Their blindness was not your burden to fix. God knew their heart long before you did. And when he placed you in their life, he already knew how they would respond. But he also knew that their reaction would never define your destiny. You are not here for their approval. You are here for God's assignment. And while they may have dismissed you, God never did. He saw your heart, he saw your efforts, and he is leading you into something greater, something that will not require you to beg to be seen, because where you are going, your value will not be questioned, your purpose will not be ignored, and your presence will be celebrated, not tolerated. So walk forward with confidence, not because they accepted you, but because God sent you. And even though they may have rejected you, your purpose remains. And it is far, far bigger than their response.